Hello, good morning everybody. My name is Sophie Meaney. I'm the Managing Director of Consulting Solutions at Amberjack. Just a very quick overview of what I was going to cover for you today. Just a very quick snapshot of who Amberjack are and the things that we help our client organisations work with. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about changing times. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the predictions of renowned futurists and the implications of some of those predictions for recruitment processes and particularly volume recruitment processes. And then actually talk a little bit about the recruitment future today. So organisations, clients we're working with where they've already embraced the opportunities that automation and technology, the digital age offers and represents. It's worth saying though that I think Amberjack believe quite passionately in the fact that although digital technology is driving an awful lot of change, the opportunities that automation represent actually can be an augmentation to the efforts of humans rather than automatically a replacement. So much of what I'm going to talk about today is how particularly in volume recruitment processes where it's always been quite hard to apply a really high-touch experience for candidates when you're dealing with significant volumes of applicants, technology actually can make processes feel more human rather than less human. So that's the premise of what we're going to talk through today. Just a very quick snapshot of who Amberjack are. Essentially, we're deep specialists in future talent and campaign-based volume recruitment. I'm going to talk a bit about futurists. I certainly wouldn't claim that we are futurists, but we are very, very interested in the predictions of futurists. We're also very interested in advances in the consumer market. And what we tend to do is look at those advances in the consumer market, look at those predictions by futurists, and look at what opportunities and implications those might have for potential innovations and impact in that volume recruitment space. We have therefore become quite well renowned for architecting and deploying some of the world's most pioneering volume recruitment processes, and I will touch on a couple of those today. I think, as I said, fundamentally, there's a lot of opportunity in this space, and I think the pace of change has already been fairly rapid over the last couple of years. I've worked in this space, specifically volume recruitment, for well over 15 years now, and I'd say the last couple of years has seen a greater pace of change than probably the combined previous 12 years. And I think one of the things that's a fact as we look forward is that pace of change is probably going to continue and almost accelerate further. So what we know today is probably almost certainly going to be radically different tomorrow and the day after. So I think the important thing is for organisations just to recognise the likely pace of that change and to start to become a little bit more open-minded to the ways in which and the way that we do things may change over time. So a very quick snapshot of actually what we do. Amberjack, we are consultants, we're an RPO provider, we're technology platform providers. We're also occupational psychologists and assessment design specialists. I'm not going to talk too much about us, though, beyond sharing a couple of very quick case studies with you. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the whole pace of change and the concept of change and the things that are likely to change over the next period of time. Just a quick show of hands in the room. How many of you are familiar with some of the predictions by futurist Ray Kurzweil? Show of hands. Couple of faces, fewer than I perhaps expected. Ray Kurzweil has some fairly interesting and potentially quite controversial predictions for what's going to happen over the course of the next 20 to 30 years. Why is it worth listening to him? Well, he's proved pretty accurate on some fairly bold predictions historically. In fact, it's claimed that about 86% of his predictions have come true. And those predictions, as I say, have been fairly bold. So as long ago as 1990, he was predicting that a computer would beat a human in chess before the end of 1998, and that happened in 1997. He predicted back in 1990 that by 2010 we'd have wireless internet, and of course he was absolutely right, ahead of 2010. He predicted the advent of exoskeletal limbs that would help people with mobility issues by 2009, and absolutely his prediction came true. In 1999, he predicted that people would be able to give verbal commands to their computers, and while this is obviously still an evolving space, he was absolutely right. He predicted augmented reality, again was right on that, And he predicted that by 2010, it would be possible for computers to do real-time language translations. And again, he was right on that. So if you think about the nature of those predictions and you think about the amount of time in advance of them becoming reality that he predicted them, you start to realize that this is a guy who maybe his ideas are worth at least paying a little bit of attention to. As we look forward to the next 20, 30 years, his predictions are in some ways quite intimidating and quite scary. He predicts that by 2045, we'll have reached a point of singularity. So for those of you who are not familiar with that term, singularity is that point at which computers are going to become smarter than humans. He actually predicts that the Matrix may very well become a reality. He predicts before then, as early as 2029, so only a little over a decade away, that computers will be as smart as humans. So this isn't automatically a bad thing. There are some really exciting things that come out of this prediction. He's saying that as early as the 2020s, nanobots are going to be able to eradicate most diseases. It's quite exciting. We're already aware of some of the predictions in relation to driverless cars, and he believes that by 2030, not only will they be the norm, but actually that humans will start to be forbidden to drive on motorways and main roads, and driverless cars will be not just the norm, but the mandate. So some big, bold predictions. And I guess really what he's saying is that this pace of change is going to only become more and more substantial. And all of this prediction is anchored in the reality of the processing power of computers that underpins a lot of this advancement and the exponential growth that exists in that space. So I really wanted to talk about this today just to open everybody's minds to this pace of change, to this fact that the reality we're dealing with today is not going to be the reality of tomorrow, and to the fact that, you know, computers, technology, automation, artificial intelligence, it's not going to go away. But equally, plus ça change, you know. We've dealt with a lot of change over the last decade or so, and as much as some things change, other things stay the same. We hear a lot of chat about, you know, millennials and how people are always absorbed in their phones these days, but it's just a different device and a different medium for delivering content. So as much as things are going to change, there will be other things that do stay the same. And as I said to start with, we believe at Amberjack very passionately that there is a lot of positive potential out of automation and a lot of positive opportunity represented by these technological advancements, so long as you approach them in the right way. So we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years working with some of the most pioneering innovative technologies in the recruitment space. So we'll talk a little bit more, but we've been using artificial intelligence to review video interviews. We've been using AI to do high-volume screen-outs. And what we've learned from introducing some of these technologies, deploying these technologies, supporting our clients in using these technologies, is that A, there's a spectrum in terms of automation, and it doesn't automatically have to be at the furthest reaches of that spectrum to be worth consideration. But also, introduction of automation isn't always, by default, a positive. In as much as automation can introduce great efficiencies, high levels of personalization, some greater level of control for the users, greater sense of status for candidates. It can help reduce bias. It can, in certain circumstances, reduce cost. On the flip side, if used for the wrong reasons, deployed badly, it can reinforce some of those biases because algorithms and data just replicate what they've been taught. So if they're not taught to apply the right rules or right rules in the right way, they can apply the wrong rules in the wrong way. And that used in the wrong way, technology can be impersonal and actually more costly than some of the human approaches. So what we tend to talk to our clients about is the selective use of technology, the opportunity to use technology in the spaces, the right spaces. So looking across your recruitment processes and looking carefully at where you have the most commoditized tasks, where that represents the greatest opportunity to remove some element of human effort, so that you can actually introduce some resource efficiencies. But then the opportunity that represents not to remove humans, but actually to redeploy humans. So to make sure that the human resources that you're deploying in your process are deployed at the point at which they can have the maximum impact. So you can take people away from some of those tasks which actually can be delivered by a computer and put them at those tasks which can't be so effectively delivered by a computer now, We'll worry about Kurzweil's predictions in 2045, but for now, there are certain tasks that a computer can't do as well as a human, and that's aspects of stakeholder engagement, candidate engagement, helping pre-qualify candidates really understand a little bit more about the organisation and the role. A lot of the high-touch stuff, which really help to introduce that element of human, and to make candidates feel like a process is really highly personalised, even while actually it might be much more automated than it might historically have been. We all know the importance of candidate experience. Candidate experience has been talked about in recruitment processes forever, but actually these days the implications of getting it wrong are much more substantial. Organisations typically underestimate the impact of poor candidate experience, but I'm sure a lot of people in the room are aware of a number of high-profile studies that have been done to illustrate the impact of negative candidate experience on the consumer reputation of their organisation. One of the clients who we work closely with, I'm going to talk a little bit about in a moment, is Unilever. They have over 300,000 applicants a year to their future talent programmes. Now, they only hire 800 people. Now, 800 is quite a high volume of new future talent to bring in, but in effect, they're declining each year 299,200 applications for potential Unilever customers. Now, as a bare minimum, they want people to walk away from that process feeling the same way about Unilever as they did when they first started to engage with them, but ideally they'd like them to feel even better, because the impact of getting it a little bit wrong is so much more substantial just on their future talent pool, because let's face it, somebody's had a bad application experience once isn't going to apply again. That's a negative thing in the first instance, but if you do have to think about the consumer implications, it gets much wider than that. And also we need to think about the magnifying impact of technology, the glass doors of this world, where one candidate's negative experience gets shared with a much broader population. So it is something we need to think really seriously about. This case study is one that I can actually talk well over an hour about, so I'm going to keep it really, really succinct and just highlight the most important messages from this process today. But really at Unilever, they were very, very, very interested in exploiting pioneering technologies. They wanted to take some very bold moves. They were very open to taking some risks. They wanted to reimagine the ways in which the candidate experience deployed, but they also wanted to bring in a pipeline of future talent that would be disruptors. They believed that the skills and abilities that had brought them the success they'd enjoyed to date would not be the skills and abilities that brought them their future success. They wanted to introduce a streamline of what they referred to as digital disruptors who'd come into the organisation authorised by a really pioneering recruitment experience to actually drive some disruption from the bottom of the organisation up. They therefore wanted to introduce a recruitment process that was actually aspirational when you looked at where they were themselves in terms of day-to-day deployment of technology, but which was looking at and introducing the types of concepts that they were using within their consumer space. So they were really very interested in the application of AI and the ways that we could look at machine learning and that sort of thing in order to drive not just efficiencies in their process, because funny enough that was less their driver, but actually a new recruitment and candidate experience that would change the way that Unilever was perceived by their future talent and would bring in a different type of future leader for them to grow their organisation over the next decade. So what did they do? The most interesting things, I suppose, were that they deployed a game-based assessment in the early stages. So many of you might already be familiar with the organisations Pymetrics, Arctic Shores, Revelion. There are now a number of organisations who are offering this game-based approach to recruitment. But fundamentally, what these psychometrics allow you to do is assess a broad profile in a highly automated way. So through the use of validation, we profiled high performers in their organisation and taught an algorithm what a high performer looked like in terms of performance and playing of those games. We were able to deselect very, very high volumes of candidates through this process. We're able to take people down from over 300,000 down to about 70,000 just through the use of an automated tool. Now, this particular tool is fun, really engaging for candidates. So one of the principles behind the original redesign was that a recruitment process could be an enjoyable experience, didn't automatically have to be a negative thing for candidates. And so that was a fundamental premise. The other fundamental premise, was that we wanted candidates to take something away from the experience, even if they weren't one of the very lucky few who make it through to the end process. So at all stages, we introduced two-way candidate feedback. So candidates are being asked to give feedback after their experience, so they get an opportunity to feel that sense of equal status. And also, there was automated personalised feedback for each candidate at the end of each experience. So even if they went no further than playing the games, they came out of the games with an enhanced sense of self-awareness. They took something away, understood a little bit more about themselves. The games also allow them to be introduced to other organisations who they might be a fit with. So just because they aren't a fit with the Unilever profile doesn't mean they wouldn't be a fit with an Accenture profile, for example. And therefore, the algorithm allows them to actually say, look, you weren't a right fit for Unilever. These are your great strengths. These are the areas that we recommend that you focus on. And also, did you know that organisations X, Y, and Z are looking for those sorts of profiles? So from a candidate experience perspective, oh, that's a real shame, I didn't get through to the next stage, but at least I've taken something meaningful away from the process. I've understood a little bit more about why I wasn't right, and I've taken an opportunity potentially to be introduced to other organisations where I might be a better fit. I mentioned we introduced artificial intelligence in the screening of those video interviews, and that was something that was really quite controversial. So the technology screens candidates out and puts them into high, medium, low buckets according to the extent to which they fit the profile response. We profiled over 700 high performers in Unilever responding to the video interviews, and then the algorithm looks at a match between those responses and the candidates' responses. Really, from a candidate experience perspective, what this does is enable the candidate from the front end to be totally in control of their experience. So they can fill in a short application, they can complete games, they can go on and complete the video interview on demand in their own time and within a 2-hour window. So for those of you who are familiar with lots of future talent processes, you'll know that often it can take weeks and weeks to get through to the stage where you're being invited through to assessment centre, often months. Unilever were able to speed that up to a point at which their average time from start of application to invitation to assessment centre was only 2 weeks. And for some candidates, it was as little as 48 hours. In this world where we're used to instant gratification, where we want to be in control of our experience, the technology enabled us to achieve that for candidates as well. We also created a virtual assessment centre, so for those candidates who had got through the process really quickly and had to wait for, goodness, a whole week, they were able to go into this virtual environment, meet the people they'd be meeting on the day, start to discuss the sorts of topics like the Internet of Things, which were the themes around which the final Discovery Centre was anchored on. The exciting thing was the fabulous levels of candidate feedback and approval that we had. So, and we were asking them at all stages how they felt. Globally, we deployed in 53 different countries. The feedback was over 83% positive. The country where there was most skepticism about deployment in the US, it was actually 87% positive. So hugely, overwhelmingly positive candidate feedback. Phenomenal implications in terms of recruiters' time saved in the front end. But the really exciting thing was what it enabled those recruiters to do, where it enabled them to focus their time. So the technology enabled them to deselect down to the small percentage who represented a prima facie fit with their requirements. And at that point, the recruiters were able to pick up the phone. So in a traditional recruitment process, a candidate might have spent a couple of hours filling out an application form. They then wait a matter of days for the company to come back with an automated email saying, right, you can go through to the testing phase. In this particular circumstance, they were able to get through all of those front pieces without having to wait for a human interaction. And then at that point, where they've completed their interview, they then get a phone call. It's not an email, it's not an impersonal email. And instead of it being another assessment stage, it's a recruiter picking up the phone saying, congratulations, really well done. You're one of those special few who've made it through this far. Let me tell you a little bit more about the organisation, about the role you've applied for, about the Discovery Centre. Let me answer your questions. And it goes highly, highly human at that point. So the technology enables them to sift through that volume in a really fair, really unbiased, really consistent manner, and then to pile a lot of attention onto those predefined few who really meet their initial requirements. So I could talk about this for hours, but I think those are some of the key premises here, that they were harnessing that technology to get through the many to the few, and so that they could then introduce a high level of touch and engagement with those few who did represent a fit with their requirements. And they used technology to ensure that there was a fair and consistent process all the way through for everybody to apply, but also that those who weren't successful still took something away from the experience. We also did something very interesting this year with Imperial Brands. So these are a very interesting organisation. They're, to some extent, a little bit controversial. They're a tobacco organisation. And technology represented a great opportunity for them to engage with people who might have been a little bit sceptical about working for a tobacco organisation in a slightly different way. Now, for those of you who have any insights into the tobacco industry, you'll realise that by necessity it's changing very substantially. So a lot of the things that put people off the tobacco industry historically aren't automatically true of a career in tobacco these days. Tobacco is less about tobacco and much more about alternatives. And Imperial Brands is going through a massive evolution. There's an enormous amount of opportunity for open-minded individuals within this organisation, but they were finding it quite hard to differentiate themselves in that crowded marketplace and to engage with candidates in a meaningful way when they were competing with other organisations like the world of Unilever, where actually the brand, with their sustainable living values, etc., has more face appeal to the majority of millennials. So within Imperial, we had, again, challenges of global deployment. So we're looking for global consistency. They have a very decentralized approach, so markets are able to deploy their own processes in their own time. And that was a great thing that technology enabled us to do, to give a degree of flexibility and control to each of those different markets so that they had a degree of standardization, but also the opportunity to deliver personalization without needing a significant resource base. So again, we were able to do a similar thing. So we started with attraction with this particular campaign, and we did a lot of highly targeted, intelligent attraction using data in order to drive targeted marketing within each of the different countries. And then again, we introduced that element of candidate control through the front end of the recruitment process. We introduced a really fun and engaging different game-based assessment at this particular stage. And then we introduced case studies, job simulations to assess candidates on the video platform. So they were able to derive, from a candidate perspective, a real insight into exactly what the role would be when they joined. And then at an assessment centre stage, we introduced a paperless assessment centre product which enabled assessors and candidates to have a truly immersive experience, so that they were doing exercises which really literally represented the world of work that they were about to enter, and assessors were able to score them in the moment, capture great data, and also have a paperless and modern experience themselves. My time has stopped working, so I have no idea how much more time I've got, so I think I'm probably coming to the end, so I will whiz through a little bit more. Just a few data points to suggest that actually there is so much opportunity to drive improvements in your process through the introduction of technology, introducing appropriate automation in the right spaces, freeing up your humans to add that human touch in the right areas, introduces happier candidates, fewer reneged offers, reduces cost per hire, increases time to hire, speed to hire, and also has actually been proven to introduce greater diversity because the technologies are automatically unbiased, so they reduce adverse impact. It is not all technologies equal. It is really important that the technology products that you're deploying obviously work with you, not against you. For those of you who do deploy any kind of volume recruitment processes, at Amberjack, all the technology products that we deploy are designed by our recruiters, for our recruiters, and designed to underpin your processes rather than dictate your processes. So things like candidate chat platforms, automated assessment tools, paperless assessment centre products, ATS, etc. Very happy to talk to you about any of the products in our suite, but we're also resellers of other products on the market as well. So really, just by way of summary, I guess the key takeaways are there is massive technological change, and anybody on the way, and anybody who is in denial would do well to sort of really challenge themselves on that and think really hard about the fact that this is almost an inevitability now. But on the flip side, to recognise the fact that not all automation is automatically positive. You do need to think really hard about what you're trying to automate, why you're trying to automate it, and how you're trying to automate it. Remember the fact that your candidates are your customers, they are your consumers. Don't be scared of the data, embrace the data. There's so much opportunity represented by data. And the great thing about technology is it gives you so much data to drive that continual improvement. But ultimately, remember, the future is going to be all about automation, but that automation doesn't need to be impersonal. That automation with the human touch is the way forward, and there really is an opportunity for humans and computers to coexist. Thank you very much.